You trudge through the sliding doors of a forward-deployed aid station, crisp white Nurse Corps dress blues freshly pressed. You're a Navy nurse assigned to a remote base. This is your first tour outside the continental US. Unlike the medics and corpsmen, you're not meant for the front, yet here you are. They laugh at your skirt, question why a Navy nurse would trade clinical rotations for combat zones. You probably won't survive this, or at least they never thought you would return. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also drop your location and local time below. Now, you get straight into it. From day one, your scrubs attract smirks. You don't look tough enough, someone says. But beneath that uniform, there's steel forged through months of trauma battle nursing training. You've poured sweat into mastering triage techniques, hemorrhage control, and shipboard crisis response drills. No one promised you'd stay safe. History doesn't show mercy. Navy Nurse Corps veterans from Vietnam days, often dismissed as secondary to battlefield medics, saved countless lives while working in makeshift operating rooms under strafed ceilings and rationed power. Retired Navy Commander Casey Meehan recently reflected on that era. She cared for soldiers in Vietnam with minimal supplies and no recognition at home. Veterans still argue today that the contributions of those nurses remain underappreciated despite their sacrifices. In your first hours, you walk past a wall of portraits at the aid station, rotating photo exhibits showcasing award-winning medics and corpsmen, no nurse's face among them. Yet stories swirl about Navy nurses injured in Vietnam air raids. 4 of them earned Purple Hearts after refusing treatment so they could continue patching more critically injured comrades. They were the first women in US Armed Forces to receive that award in that conflict. Those women bore shrapnel wounds and blistering burns, but insisted their patients came first. That bit of fringe law says one nurse rewrapped her own head wound with charcoal-stained bandages so she looked more injured and more patients would get rapid evacuation before her. That stubborn drive to care, surprising even then, still reverberates. You set up the triage bay beside the landing helipad under canvas that flaps in humid wind. From the start, you maintain composure, even when an army medic snorts, "Hey nurse, got any band-aids?" You don't respond. You've seen real wounds. Limbs shattered by IEDs, hemorrhaging arteries you must clamp before the next helicopter departs. In a past article, veterans comment that Navy nurses often receive backlash for speaking up, even when they save lives. Veterans still argue that the chain of command routinely overlooks valor from uniformed nursing personnel. Just a nurse becomes a silent erasure of months of trauma zone heroism. You recall that the Navy Nurse Corps was only granted full rank and equal pay after World War II in 1944. Before that, officers addressed them as nurse, not lieutenant, regardless of actual rank. That lack of formal respect echoes here. Yet Lena Sutcliffe-Higbee, the second superintendent of the Nurse Corps, proclaimed early, wherever the US Navy operates, the nurse must establish herself. That's your silent mantra. You move among stretchers, your presence unnoticed until a soldier grabs your hand, thrashing, calling your name in delirium. You steady him, whisper instructions into his ear. He stops bleeding. People whisper hero afterward, but command never mentions your name. The news will never show your uniform. A sudden explosion jolts the base, a mortar round slams nearby. Dust rains over your bay and chaos floods in. You feel adrenaline surge. This is the moment they doubted your purpose. Now they see steel beneath the scrubs. You spring into action. Bullets shred the air beyond the canvas walls of your aid station. Enemy fire rattles the surrounding sandbags. Inside, wounded soldiers line the stretchers, cries of agony sharp and urgent. Your hands steady. You unzip a trauma kit. You remember that nervous first impression. Scrubs, skirt, and the jokes. Now you're everything in this chaos. Nurse, surgeon's assistant, morale anchor. The ambush erupted without warning. A convoy hitting an IED dozens of miles from base pushed a flood of casualties toward your bay. They arrive in waves. You've trained for triage order, but nothing quite matches the smell of fresh blood mingled with dust and panic. You lean low beside a Marine whose leg is detached by a blast. You're calm. You call for help, guide corpsmen to clamp arteries, initiate pressure. You're trained in tactical combat casualty care. They still doubt your presence here. until you authoritatively direct a multi-step vascular repair while a medic hesitates. Your gloves soak with blood. Your face stings from the dust thrown by the explosion outside. You steady your voice. You instruct sedation via IV bolus. You're stitching through muscle and bone fragments. Surgeons aren't present yet, but you make decisions. You elevate a fallen body, reassure the teenager drifting in shock. His eyes lock onto yours as you whisper, "Stay with me." He squeezes your hand. You don't blink. In the moments before the helicopter arrives, you manage hemorrhage and secure bandages. Your uniform is torn in places, mud and blood. You keep working. A Navy corpsman murmurs, "You saved him." Wit cracks you, just a nurse. But you know it's not what they say. Around you, medics and soldiers begin speaking, quietly recounting how the just a nurse fixed a major bleed, inserted chest tubes, calmed a bay full of screaming men. A recent Navy Times article recounted how current Navy nurses on deployment in hostile zones have been thrust into such roles far beyond expectations, performing procedures on the fly with minimal backup and holding whole units in stasis until evacuation arrives. Veterans still debate over how much credit goes where, with corpsmen sometimes getting official commendations, while nurses' records note assisted. No medal. A strange detail sticks. The base has a small statue of a Dalmatian named Daisy that belonged to a nurse in World War II, supposedly sniffing out infection. You joke to a corpsman that you could use Daisy now, sniffing out wound infection in the chaos. The joke settles nerves. That quirky story from mid-century Navy law reminds you, nursing often comes with folklore to fill gaps in formal recognition. You see the helicopter's rotor wash swoop in dust. Medical evacuation teams rush in. You brief them quickly. This one is critical, needs transport now. You lift the wounded Marine onto the gurney. He clutches your hand. He tells you he thought he was done for. You smile softly and step back. But inside your heart is pounding. You've lost calm only for a heartbeat. Later, survivors speak of the chaos you managed. They recount how you triaged 60 casualties in under 90 minutes and directed surgical prep for 4 critical cases before the surgical team arrived by air. Their stories, shared on service-wide forums, highlight how nurses like you act as unsung first responders. Comments echo that command sometimes overlooks this heroism, though these stories slowly filter up. Veterans still argue that it's the informal talk at mess halls and group chats that keep these memories alive, not the official commendation process. After the dust settles, you collapse onto a chair. Medics bring you water. You're shaking. A lieutenant approaches, eyes wide. "You did good," he says. You shrug. "Just doing my job," you answer. Your uniform is stained. You brush off dirt from your collar. You don't feel like a hero. But there's no doubt among the Marines whose lives you held in your hands. They begin to tell others. Their voices will carry. You return stateside on leave, but it feels like travel between galaxies. Here your uniform seems out of place. People call you just a nurse. Friends, family, even your civilian medical colleagues compliment your poise, but no one grasps the war zone you've endured. At a small gathering in your hometown, someone jokes, "Bet you missed your nice hospital bed." You smile, but inside you're reminded of the endless rows of stretchers and the smell of antiseptic mixed with dust and adrenaline. In veterans forums online, survivors from your deployment start posting stories. One Marine writes, "She saved my life with one draw sheet move. I thought I'd never breathe again." A fellow corpsman recalls how you directed them. "When she spoke, we listened. She had credibility." There's quiet buzz in posts on both the VA news pages and Military Times Veterans blog. Debates flare about why your name never reached the award board. One commenter writes, "Veterans still argue that the Navy Nurse Corps gets overshadowed. The real heroes wear white coats under fire and don't get medals." Their tone is respectful but frustrated, underscoring a systemic blind spot. That fringe detail surfaces again. During junior years, you carried a coin, engraved with a vintage anchor, that a retired Vietnam nurse had given you. Legend says that anchor was blessed in a field hospital chapel and handed only to nurses who performed triage under fire. You kept it in your pocket all deployment. You pull it out now and it feels heavy, like the weight of unspoken acknowledgement. Back with command, you submit a report on what happened. You document the triage stats. 60 casualties triaged, 4 prepped for surgery, 2 classified as walking wounded but later evacuated, 1 confirmed death on arrival. You include witness statements from Marines and medics under oath. You attach quotes, "She saved my brother, I'd be gone." You expect your Bronze Star or Navy Commendation, but weeks pass, the award never appears. When command responds, they say your actions assisted, but fell short of the Valor threshold set in regulations, citing technicalities, some wounds treated outside designated casualty evacuation zone. You're stunned. How does saving lives on arrival zone disqualify you? In the months following, you read an investigative write-up in military.com about similar cases. Nurses who led triage under fire often get assisted tags, while combat medics get full credit for the same procedures, just because medics are enlisted and nurses are officers and occupy different oversight categories. Veterans still argue. On Federal News Network and VetServe, contributors highlight institutional bias. Command repeatedly overlooked nurse-led heroism, especially for female officers at minor awards level. The frustration is palpable. Service-wide chats lament that the award system values roles over results. You're invited to speak at a local VA-sponsored event. You share your experience, acknowledging your colleagues and those who passed. A veteran in the audience stands up, tears in his eyes, saying, "Thank you for making it back alive." Later, one female corpsman approaches and quietly thanks you, saying, "You changed how I see my work." That night, sitting alone, you realize recognition isn't just about medals. It's about stories and about shifting perception. And those forums, the posts from survivors, they start getting traction, picked up by mainstream veterans' site coverage. Slowly, your story nudges the narrative. You're frustrated, but you begin crafting op-eds and guest blogs for veterans' outlets. You describe triage under ambush, chaos, fear, the drill when the helicopter arrives. You make clear this wasn't showboat valor, it was commitment to every life in the bay. Your voice resonates. Dozens comment, "Finally someone speaks for us. It needed to be said." The ripple grows. Veterans still argue, but now they argue in your favor, recognizing that virtues shown under fire aren't always registered on the awards ledger. The gap between just a nurse and someone whose name echoes in forums closes a bit. Survivors keep posting, and veteran sites echo your words. She didn't ask for medals. She asked for truth. That simple statement begins to stick. Recognition either for you or for the Nurse Corps starts trending in veterans' circles. The unseen pages of awards rosters get challenged, and you feel something shift, not in brass pins but in conversation. You sense the long tail of silence after the failings of command. Years later, a leaked internal report circulates among veterans' news outlets and Federal News Network contributors, and your name appears, not as hero, but as bypassed. The report details how award boards often disqualify nurse-led actions due to technical clashing between medical zones and combat zones. You read phrases like outside designated casualty evacuation zone and procedural exclusion, as though saving lives had to check a bureaucratic box to count. Veterans still argue that nurses routinely bear the emotional labor of frontline care but are squeezed out of the accolades. Contributors lament that command doesn't frame triage as valor when executed by commissioned medical officers rather than enlisted medics. That twist drives you. This wasn't about you seeking glory. This was about exposure. You push forward. You give interviews to Military Times blogs and NBC News veterans columnists describing your actions, not for a medal, but for accountability. You explain triage under fire, the dozen decisions you made solo, the bleed out you stopped 15 seconds before fatality. You note how other nurses, some receiving Daisy Awards at Guantanamo Bay and 29 Palms in 2025, got recognition directly from patients and staff, while your contributions were framed as assisted in official records. That disparity fuels debate across VetServe and federal veterans forums. How does a nurse get Daisy-level praise for compassion while frontline trauma saves remain unseen? Veterans still argue, publicly and passionately, that nursing heroism lives in stories, not in medal rows. A fringe detail they pick up. Recent Daisy Award ceremonies at naval hospitals declare that nominations come from patients, not command, so compassion can override rank structure. You point to that as proof. Invisibility isn't about lack of action, it's about chain of command silence, and sometimes classifying Valor as mere support. In forums, someone quotes a Vietnam-era Navy nurse remembered by Casey Meehan. "We heard the sound of helicopters, and we kept working, not asking permission to save life, doing it." That spirit, veterans note, persists. Modern Navy nurses still go above and beyond behind the scenes, yet awards seldom list their names. In a recent CNN-style commentary on veterans' sites, contributors pointed out that nurse staffing shortages at VA facilities demonstrate how undervaluing nursing ultimately harms veterans themselves. You become a lightning rod. Orderlies, survivors, medics testify. You share the document leaked from the award board under FOIA, showing the disqualification rationale. You highlight other similar cases described in military news, instances where nurses who performed chest decompression or surgical prep under fire ended up with assisted citations, not Bronze Stars. Veterans' voices flood. "I saw her. A grown-up calming catastrophe, but brass didn't see." That collective frustration turns into petition campaigns on veterans' advocacy sites, pressing the Navy Nurse Corps Association to revise award criteria and demand retroactive recognition. Some pushback comes. Bureaucrats argue standards exist for fairness. But survivors and advocacy groups counter. Fairness doesn't equate to erasure. You become a symbol, a nurse whose unawarded actions catalyze a broader demand. Honor those who acted when medals had nothing to do with saving a life. That push shapes policies at VA nursing conferences and military health symposiums. Today, Navy Nurse Corps leaders cited in a 2025 conference emphasize leadership, compassion, and clinical excellence, and point to Daisy Awards and grassroots stories as the real measure of impact, not just gazettes of medals. Meanwhile, veteran blogs reflect your influence. She didn't beg for bronze, she asked for truth. They argue that truth rewrites history, and slowly a shift begins. You're still unpaid in medal terms, but in stories, in articles, in whispered reverence among medics and survivors, your steel beneath the scrubs echoes across a new generation narrative. You stand in a training auditorium at the Navy Corps School, now invited as a guest speaker. Rows of 4-star insignias watch you from projector slides, but your eyes are on the young medics and nurses in their scrubs and patrol caps. They've printed photos of you in your stained uniform on their briefing boards. They're silent at first, then one raises a tentative hand. Your presentation doesn't read like Valor brags. It's crisp, real, human. You recount the ambush, the waves of casualties, your anchor coin in your pocket. You describe triage in the sand, stitching through dust and fear, and how survivors later posted stories that made waves across Military Times, NBC News veterans columns, and Vets Serve commentary. You speak in second person. You will arrive in chaos. You will stand between life and loss. That shift, the change from silence to curriculum, is palpable. In the following days, instructors send you emails with notes. They're reworking course modules to include nurse-led triage scenarios. A medical history professor tells you they'll reference your deployment in classes teaching ethics under fire. A historian working on a new edition of a nursing textbook in 2026 includes your experience under the Naval Nurse Corps section. Veterans forums mention this ripple. One nurse's quiet courage changed training doctrine. You realize that those old arguments about whether nurses count are now integrated into national conversation within the Corps. Veterans still argue online and in halls, but font size grows. Stories of nurses leading trauma bays have become case studies. The fringe detail appears again. One of the medics shows you a patch they designed, a silhouette of Daisy the Dalmatian sniffing a medical cross. They call it the Daisy Protocol patch. It's taped to their notebook, a quiet tribute to that lore and your story. You feel recognition in that gesture more than any medal. They explain, Daisy, once rumoured to sniff infection in field wards, is now symbol of unseen care. That patch gets circulated to medics training overseas. You realise your role in reviving folklore to signal excellence beyond the awards system. In forums and blogs across Army, Navy, VA, healing communities, your case is cited, not just as an anecdote, but as catalyst for change. Medical training articles describe the nurse-driven triage under fire protocol formed after your story went viral on veterans' sites in late 2025. They cite survivors posting on VA news threads and military.com reflecting frustration, with quotes like, "Why does rank overshadow role?" echoed widely. Veterans still argue, but now they use your words to demand revision of award criteria and formal recognition of nurse agency in combat scenarios. At a VA nursing symposium in early 2026, senior officials reference your case study when announcing a new award track specifically for combat nursing excellence. The Naval Nurse Corps Association releases guidelines. Daisy-level acts under fire can now be submitted directly by commanding officers. You attend the unveiling, sitting quietly in the back row as they describe the new template for recognizing nurse-specific trauma leadership. A senior officer acknowledges publicly, the story of one nurse, once laughed at in uniform, inspired this procedural shift. Survivors you treated reach out. One Marine from that ambush tracks you down and sends a video message. You gave me more than care. You gave me a second chance. Others post comments on veterans advocacy sites. Because of her, we now file combat awards for medics and nurses equally. That message ripples. High-level committees review rules requiring incident classification zones, nurse responsibilities, and written testimony. Dialogue continues in VetServe forums and Federal News Network columns with testimonies quoting, "She didn't wait for validation. She changed the system." You feel something real. You're no longer just the nurse who got overshadowed. You become a standard. Each classroom case study, each patch, each policy discussion echoes that shift. The system that once brushed you aside is now transformed, at least in part, by those very actions they once labelled assisted. And the real measure isn't the plaque on a wall, it's the policy, the training, the respect embedded in Navy medical culture onward. A single nurse's truth reshaped what counts as valor in care. You're deployed again when crisis strikes, a remote humanitarian mission near a coastal region hit by sudden unrest. Your new team is brand new recruits, medics, corpsmen and nurses who've heard your story before reporting. They carry the legacy of your name on their gear, inked quietly in marker on helmets and morale patches. The sector goes hot. You observe from the side, but your impact is present. Your modules have trained these medics to look to nurses as equal partners in crisis response. When mortar fire rains down on the makeshift hospital camp, chaos erupts. But this time, protocols are different. Nurses stand alongside corpsmen in officially sanctioned zones. They triage, direct evacuation, categorize, calm. No exclusion about evacuation zones. The system you shifted responds differently. A wounded aid worker arrives with arterial bleeding and compromised airway. A Navy nurse, trained in the new modules, leans in the shadow of yours and performs rapid decompression. Under her breath, you hear her whisper, "You got this." You think back to your first deployment, the ambush, the chaos, the doubt. Now you're watching the legacy. That injured aid worker's life is saved before evacuation arrives. The team works smoothly. The nurse's actions are logged as primary, not assisted. Command awards a combat action ribbon and Navy commendation to her. The decision-makers explicitly reference your guidelines in the award citation. Veterans still argue, on forums, blog posts, comment threads, that this represents real progress. No longer is care siloed by rank, trauma zone definitions, or tradition. Your role has shifted from marginalized to model. In post-mission debriefs, you're invited to assess protocols. You watch young leaders carry notebooks emblazoned with the DAISY protocol patch, comparing case files. You realize your story, once buried, has become instruction. After the crisis, the team gathers at the helipad. A young corpsman approaches. He says, "When things got dark, seeing her training in action gave me confidence." A nurse nods and adds, "We heard your story before we came. Thank you." You don't say much. You just shake your head, feeling the weight of what's changed. In VetServe and on NBC Veterans News, people note that this mission served as the first real test of the revised award guidance addressing nurse-led actions. One veteran blogger writes, "This isn't one-off praise, it's structural tribute." Another comments, "Because of her, care under fire saved lives without bias." Forums replay old posts. Remember when nurses were dismissed? Not anymore. Veterans still argue, but now they cite action. You walk away from the helipad in the evening sun. There's a chill on the breeze. You think of that anchor coin in your pocket, worn smooth. You remember the jokes, the doubts, the laughter at your scrubs. Now you know. Your work launched a ripple from laughter to legacy. Sunlight softens over the compound. The dust settles into shadows at day's end. You move slowly, each breath syncing with the gentle hum of distant generators. The tension of potential conflict recedes, leaving a silence filled by the faint echo of helicopters overhead. You sense the weight of change in the still air. The same uniform cloth that once drew skepticism now represents quiet authority and earned respect. The shift wasn't loud. It was steady, built stitch by stitch in your aid station, carried forward by survivors, amplified by stories, authenticated by policy. You feel reassurance. You feel that every pulse you stopped under that flapping tarp, every decision taken while bullets screamed past, mattered. Not because a medal affirmed it, but because lives did. Because trainees followed, policies changed, awards reformed. You inhale a breath of calm. You've moved from a caretaker in doubt to a beacon of competence. The name beneath the daisy silhouette patch is not just ink. It's recognition inked in action, not decoration. You weren't erased. You echo. Fade the scene. The sun dips below distant dunes. Lights in the camp blink on, gentle. The daisy patch rests on your duffel bag, quiet tribute to silent sacrifice. You close your eyes and feel the breeze carry gratitude, from survivors, from trainees, from colleagues who once ignored you. This is not an end. It's soft continuation, a legacy carried in each nurse-led bay, each nurse whose actions command respect. Let the story sink in. Let it remind you, courage does not wait for ceremony. Courage simply acts, and sometimes that action rewrites history.